Hi guys, my name is Christian. Hopefully you are all doing well. So last weekend I spent at the wonderful Studio Mega, which probably have one of the best drum rooms here in Sweden. They got very high ceilings, great depth and width in the room, and the first time that I recorded there, it felt like listening back to a tune track library. I was there to engineer some drums for my good friend Henrik Udd, who is really one of the best metal producers slash mixers in the world. He has a crazy credit list including bands like Architects, Bring Me the Horizon, and At the Gates, and just many, many more. I was hoping that I could share those samples that we made during this session, but I think we have to wait until that album comes out. But this is not the first time that I've been to that studio, so I thought that I would share some samples that I did with the band called Imminence. It's from around 2018 and it was for their last full-length album. And I do believe these samples were made on an SSL console which the studio had and have now sold. So there is slight compression coming in, and it's always nice to get that real hardware SSL snappy channel strip compression. But before we end this short episode, I thought that we could jump into Pro Tools so I can give you my thought process and try to remember which microphones we used. So let's do it. Okay, so here I have the snare microphones that I used. And let's start from the top with the basic close microphone, which is a Shure SM57. I wish that I used a couple of more snare microphones, but this is what we got. So here it is. So quite a lot of sustain. I tend to prefer snares with a lot of sustain because then they will survive in a mix and you just don't get the transient when a full mix is playing. So a nice sustain really helps the drums in a lot of ways if it's somewhat controlled. Moving on to the snare mono room, and this is an AKG 414EB with an original brass C12 capsule. So this is the same capsule that you'll find in an original C12 and ELA M251. And this have such a nice splash to it, and I think it's only like 1.5 meters above the snare, but you can really hear the glorious room splash in this microphone. So let's hear it. So we'll give you a nice splash sustain to the snare. And moving on to the overheads, I think this is just when I bought the Coles, and this is Coles 4038. And these are probably the most affordable classic drum microphone that you can find. Sure, they are quite expensive, but they have a very nice sound. And the first time that I've used them, it was like listening back to a thousands of records that I heard in the past. So it has a very unique signature sound. And the nice thing about using ribbon microphones on drums is that the shells usually come on top. Using other microphones, the shells are usually the same levels as the cymbals, or the cymbals are louder. And that might be something that you prefer, but it's kind of nice to have that extra shell punch in the overheads as well. And moving on to the snare room, this is probably my pair of vintage U87s, which I have now sold, but I kind of like the U87s on room. So here is the large room of Studio Mega. And listening back to the whole snare kit. Yeah, so that sounds pretty decent to my ears. Hopefully, you'll find these samples useful. And I will also be throwing in a couple of other snare samples that I've done in the past, and hopefully, you'll find them useful as well. Okay, that's all for today's episode. Hopefully, you will find these samples useful. And as a small bonus, I will throw in a couple of other samples that I've done over the years. And yeah, if you like this kind of content, please hit subscribe and give me a thumbs up. And hopefully, I'll see you around.